It didn't work. He didn't listen. Hey, I want to introduce somebody to you that I'm really excited is here with us this morning. Brian Gray is the name of the guy who's going to be sharing from God's Word this morning. Brian works at a Christian nonprofit in Denver right now, focused on helping the church and all of the church, all of God's people, discover where it is that God is calling them into ministry, no matter where they live, work, spend their time. And he's doing a great job at that. For the 4 years before he was there, he was at Denver Seminary, where he ran their training and mentoring program. And then for the 13 years before that, he was a pastor at a couple Denver area churches. And Brian tells me that through that all, he's been married way out of his league for about 13 years. So well done on that. And he works as hard as he can on making sure his kids parent him well. So those are the things that Brian wants us to know about him. So Brian, come on up, and I'd love to pray for you as you get ready to bring us into God's Word this morning. Would you guys pray with me? Father, thank you that Brian gets to be with us this morning. Thank you as we've been going through the parables, as we've been learning what it is to be good soil, to be receptive to your word. And so as we go into another parable this morning, as Brian shares with us, which you've been sharing with him in these past days and weeks, God, we pray that we would be receptive. We pray that we would be open to what you are doing in our midst, and that ultimately your word would be planted in the life of this community today. And we pray this all in your name, Jesus. Amen.
One thing that kindly Carl didn't mention in that brief biography, which you'd probably love to hear about any guest speaker who's coming into your congregation, is that I am nursing a really bad addiction right now. I am addicted to the Liverpool Football Club. Now, if in American speak, that's English soccer, and it's my favorite English soccer team. And the outworking of this addiction is primarily I am up against a significant fiscal decision in my family right now. And that is whether or not we are going to become cord cutters. If you're not familiar with what cord cutters are, they're people who cut cable, leave dish TV, etc., have no type of television in their home. Now, for 20 years, that was me. And then I moved into this wonderful season called Dual Income No Kids, at which point the world was my oyster, and my wife and I decided that it was okay for us to have TV for a bit. That has set up my addiction to the Liverpool Football Club. Because last year I had access to every game that Liverpool played. And this year I've got to make decisions about what to do about that $100 a month bill that keeps showing up, which is called cable, or in our case, dish, DirecTV. So as my wife and I have been talking about it, it started as a financial issue that we needed to consider. But as we keep looking at it, it also feels like a consideration of how we're actually spending our time. We've enjoyed either listening to audiobooks or reading at night instead of watching Stephen Colbert. That's not another addiction, but it flirts with it. I look at my kids every now and then. My kids don't watch much TV. I'd say they watch less than an hour a day. But I keep thinking, what do I want my kids doing with their time? And so what started for me is just an issue of finances and trying to find how we're going to make this budget work on a monthly basis. Started to move into how we spend our money and how we're spending our time and how we're spending our marital energy conversationally and how we are thinking about our kids. In other words, this has moved into not just stewarding our lives financially, but we realize, hey, it's actually a lot bigger issue that touches a lot of different areas. Now, I'm deeply hopeful that God's going to let me off the hook and I get to keep cable and I keep watching Liverpool football, and that is a full confession, and please judge me afterwards, and I am happy to defend that. But the point of this is, I've been thinking about this a lot, and then there's maybe it's irony or maybe it's just divine comedy that Carl asked me to teach on the passage that I'm teaching on today while I've been sitting in this type of conversation with my wife for the last month. Before getting to the parable, let me give us just a little bit of a context today. in terms of where this parable fits in the life of Jesus. So Christians believe in general, not in general. We just sang a song that says Christians believe that Christ was born, lived his life, and died. Nothing odd about that until we get to the fact that he rose from the dead, ascended to be with the Father again, and at some point in the future will return. And so in this timeline of his life, the parable that we'll look at today is right at the end of his life. In fact, it's really his last teaching before his arrest and before his death. And he has his mind on conversation with the disciples about the future of what the nature of both his return will look like and what preparation for that would look like. So our parable is coming from the biography of Jesus written by Matthew today. And if you were to be at about Matthew 24, this is where Jesus' last teaching before his arrest begins. And he's foretelling something of the future when he will return. Then he moves in to Matthew 25 and he tells a parable or a story about what it means or to encourage being ready for his return. So instead of just anticipating at some point, there's some type of activity amongst those who are his followers about being ready. And this is the parable of the 10 virgins. So then the parable that we'll look at today sits within that larger context. And I want to suggest that today's parable is actually about what the ready life looks like. Now, a great biblical scholar told me this. He said, the parables cast a vision of the kingdom and challenge us to stop resisting and start living their message. And as it turns out, that great biblical scholar is not Carl, it's actually Clyde Snodgrass. So that means that your pastor is officially stealing and quoting other people in his own name. He actually didn't tell me who it was from. I just assumed it was Carl. But the point of this is, this has been a little bit of a theme, it seems, that's been running through your teaching on the parables. The parables in general are casting a vision of what the kingdom is like. And then they are challenging us to not be resisting that, but actually to be moving into that with our life. And I would say that this certainly fits with our parable today. We're going to be looking at Matthew 25 at the parable of the bags of gold. It used to be the parable of the talents, and we can talk about this in just a minute. It's a synonym for each other. First thought, a quick parenthesis on interpreting the parables, because this is how we'll go about it today. In interpreting the parables, a really good rule of thumb, it's not always perfectly and cleanly applied by a guy who loves rules and loves to follow them, but a good rule of thumb when you approach the parables is that in general, most parables have to them one main theme, and that main theme is played out, or it's developed through, or it unfolds through several of the main characters, or all of the main characters that are in that parable. And so, I think a couple weeks ago, y'all talked about the parable of the soils. Is that right? You just mentioned it? Okay, so in the parable of the soils, Jesus actually uses this idea about interpreting the parables when he takes his disciples as a side conversation with them, right? So he says, the parable of the 4 soils, first of all, the seed that's scattered is the teaching or the message of the kingdom. And the 4 different soils, or if you will, the 4 main characters in his story, offer to us 4 either types of people or 4 responses to the message of the kingdom. Okay? And so in general, this idea of interpreting the parables, they usually have to them one main theme, but it's unfolded, has subpoints to it or sublessons in each of the main characters. And that's certainly the case today. But as we talk about the parable of the bags of gold today in Matthew 25, I'm actually going to preach it a little bit differently. And what I mean by that is, my guess is if I were to have a show of hands, and I won't do this and out anybody, if I was to have a show of hands, okay, on a 1 to 10 scale, how many of you would say, hey, I'm about at least a 6 or 7 out of 10 in terms of familiarity with the parable of the talents or the parable of the bags of gold? My guess is that most people would raise their hand. Most of them would say, hey, I'm pretty familiar with this. Which means there's not this really great shock ending coming at the end of the parable. Oh my gosh, where's it going to go next? Most of us have a little bit of an idea. So what I'd like to do is just talk through it and suggest that perhaps along the way there might be just 1 or 2 ideas that are a part of one of the subpoints that might be something that you would take with you and you would reflect upon following today. So Matthew 25, a quick plot summary. Let's begin, and I'll read the first two verses to set it up in verses 14 and 15. So Matthew 25, verse 14. Again, this is the kingdom, again, it will be like a man going on a journey, who called his servants and entrusted his wealth to them. To the one he gave 5 bags of gold, to another 2 bags, and to another 1 bag, each according to his ability. And then he went on a journey. So we see at the very beginning that Jesus is in essence set up for us all of the main characters that are going to be a part of this parable. And as it goes, the general plot line, which again is probably not a surprise to most, not all of us, most of us in the room, is this. The one that has the 5 and the one that has the 2 bags of gold, they go out and invest and make a return of 5 and 2 bags of gold. But the one that has the 1 bag of gold, out of fear, out of not wanting to lose on that investment, takes and holds on to the 1 bag, doesn't invest, returns the 1 bag. When the master returns, the ones that have taken 5 and 2 and made 5 and 2 are commended, and the one that has held on to just the 1 and done nothing with it in terms of investment in the bigger picture is actually condemned. So this is the general plot line. Again, my suspicion is that most of us know how and where this is going to go. So if we were to apply that idea of how we generally interpret parables to this one, I would suggest the parable is a main theme developed by each main character. The main characters are pretty clear. There's a rich man, and in this case is representing the perspective of God in the kingdom life. And then there's 3 characters who are investing, and they are actually representing types of people who are responding to the message of the kingdom, followers of Christ in this case. And I want to suggest that this parable is actually not about money. I don't think it's about money whatsoever. I actually think that the main theme of this, if we take it in that larger context we talk about, is that Jesus is telling his followers what it looks like to lead a ready life. What it looks like to lead a life that wouldn't ever be surprised or caught off guard by that eventual return of Jesus coming back and saying, how have you been spending this one precious life I've given you? So I think this is about the ready life. Now, I'd suggest that it would be a little bit odd to talk about the ready life and come all the way back and say, and we're going to demonstrate the ready life just through how you spend your money. But let me confess for a minute that this is a professional confession, okay? As a pastor for 13 years, most of the time, when pastors talk about the idea of stewardship, they have in the back of their mind, or coming right out of their mouth in their words, one primary subject, and it is your wallets, right? It's our wallets. Now, this is not of ill intent. The way we spend our money is a primary issue of discipleship. Jesus talked about it more than actually any other subject, which is always a stunning thing that I have to go back and research and have confirmed. Yeah, he really did talk about money more than anything else. But when we talk about the idea of stewardship, how we take what we have and use it well, what we're usually doing, those of us who are in occupational pastoral ministry, we're kind of focusing down on one area, and it means money. Hey, we've got a plot of land over here. Hey, we've got to build a new 4-story water slide for the youth group. Is that what you said you wanted to do? Thank you, yeah. And so, church, we all need to be good stewards, right? And I don't mean this in any kind of cynical way. I offer this as confession, that we've taken stewardship and we've held it hostage to the idea of money and how we spend our money, which is a critically important idea to Jesus and the kingdom life. But stewardship is just not about our money. And that's not how Jesus is teaching it here. So I think there's 2 barriers to understanding the main theme, and that's the first one. I actually think that this parable is about whole life stewardship. And it just uses money as a metaphor, the investment of money as a metaphor for what we're really supposed to be paying attention to. So I think oftentimes we preachers offer a barrier, but I think that there's a second barrier to the idea of understanding this as whole life stewardship, and it's the way that we all talk about the idea of spirituality. Have you ever either heard this phrase or used this phrase? You're talking about something in the way that you connect with God or your devotional practices, and you talk with somebody else about your spiritual life. Have you ever heard the phrase, my spiritual life, or ever used the phrase, my spiritual life? I'm actually confused as to what most people mean when they say my spiritual life. I think I know what they mean, and I think I know it's what I've often said most of my life. But the problem with this idea of the spiritual life is it takes an area of our lives and names it as spiritual and assumes that it's a part. So let me give you a little visual representation. We use this oftentimes over at the seminary. This is if you'll forgive me, I'm going to reduce your life to a two-dimensional circle with segments. Now, this image comes right out of the business coaching world. And so if I was an executive coach and we were sitting down and talking with a businesswoman about wanting to advance in the career ranks, and we're going to talk about wanting her to have a balanced or an integrated life, we're going to talk about a number of different dimensions about her life. So we could go through and we could talk about business and career. We could talk about your finances, right? We could talk about your family life, talk about a number of different things. Here's this aspect called your spirituality. It's an aspect of your life. If we are in an all-religious or a not necessarily Christian environment, a secular humanist philosophy, this is a perfectly appropriate description of the human person. That spirituality is this tag on the side. It's one aspect, just like finances, just like whether or not I worked out and I'm fit, just like anything else. But a Christian vision of one's life, or Christian anthropology, the theology of what the human being actually is, would contend against this. We can still talk about the whole of our lives, and we can still talk about different dimensions of our life, different aspects of it. But two things. One, they are not discrete from one another. They're integrated with each other. We are one whole person expressing each of these aspects of our being. And two, what you'll notice if we're going to talk about a Christian vision of a horrid two-dimensional circle to capture your life, there's no such thing as spiritual up here. Because a spiritual life is not any one dimension. A spiritual life is actually the whole. Every aspect of who we are is our spiritual life. And if every aspect of our life is our spiritual life, this means that God is terribly invasive and wants about the whole of who we are. That his concerns are not just what we did with the 40 minutes when we woke up in the morning and sat in the green chair in our family room with a cup of coffee and the Bible in our prayer life. I just described my living room and what I like to do, okay? It's not that that is our spiritual life. Or when I go to my small group and I invest in one place that there's some aspect of my spiritual life, I can't go point to and locate my spiritual life if I'm a follower of Christ. The whole of one's life is one's spiritual life, and God cares about every aspect of it. And if we start to divide aspects of our lives into the secular and the sacred, we do what God has never intended for us to do, and we reduce some aspects of our world to second-class citizenry. Well, these things are important to God, and then there's all the rest of it. And so, a barrier potentially to understanding this parable is we can look at spirituality as an aspect of our life and not the whole of our life. Or maybe we're just talking about our financial lives if we look at this parable. And I would suggest that the entirety of a Christian's life is spiritual, is important to God, and he wants all of it. Okay. Let me talk about, as we move into this concept, we're going to talk about really two perspectives on investing that come out of this parable. There's two concepts, the main character of God and then the main character of the three servants. So two concepts, two perspectives on investing. The first one is God's investing. So the owner, the one who gives out the bags of gold, we're asking the question, well, in the life of the kingdom, what is God like? What is God like, and what are we taught here? So really, three ideas I want to share about what God is like in this parable. And the first one, that God's investment is not equal for all. And we're just going to let that sit with our 2017 modern sensibilities, that God's investment into people is not equal for all people. Verse 15 that we just read. To one he gave 5 bags, to another 2 bags, and to another 1 bag. Okay. Each according to his ability. And then he went on his journey, seemingly totally unconcerned that he just defied our 2017 sensibilities right there with the distribution system, right? So God's investment into people is actually not equal. really two thoughts on this. We're going to talk about the nature of what he invests, and we'll return to that shortly, but two thoughts on the fact that on this idea of equality. This, for me personally, I suspect I'm not the only one in the room, this pushes me right up against the limits of what I can understand about the motives in the heart of God, which is there are certain things that I look at when I look around the world and I see them to be a mess. They seem unjust. I don't understand them. And I have to put up next to those, there is a living God, and I am not him. And therefore, when I see situations of disequality in the world, it's not that I am uninvolved in them at all, but when I see situations of disequality and I say, God, why isn't everything equal? I have to run up against the fact that there is a living God, and he is sovereign, and I am not him. And so as a first concept, we recognize that God gives and invests in his people with a particular diversity, different for every person. This would be very easy for us to find as we talk about spiritual gifts passages. We could look at a number of different places. This isn't a foreign concept biblically. But not only does God give in diversity, but he gives actually unequally. And that is a difficult thing to sit with. Now, I would say that God doesn't give to people equally, but he does give with equity. And that's because of the second idea. His giving and investment into people is not equal. He doesn't give every single person the same thing. That would be actually like making a bunch of robots and automatons, and that is horribly uninteresting to any of us, I would suspect. So his investment is not equal, but it does have equity in that there's fairness. He actually, from every single person, no matter what he gives unequally, does expect a return. He's expecting a return. So I want to read the rest of the passage at this point as you see this unfolding. I've already given you the plot line, but you can see how this works itself out. Let's pick up in verse 19, actually. That was my plot summary, captured the first part. Verse 19, after a long time, the master of those servants returned, and he settled accounts with them. The man who had received 5 bags of gold brought the other 5. Master, he said, you've entrusted me with 5 bags of gold. See, I've gained 5 more. His master replied, well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful with a few things. I put you in charge of many things. Come, share your master's happiness. The man with 2 bags of gold also came. Master, he said, you entrusted me with 2 bags of gold. See, I've gained 2 more. His master replied, well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share your master's happiness. Then the man who had received 1 bag of gold came. Master, he said, I knew that you're a hard man, harvesting where you have not sown, gathering where you've not scattered seeds. So I was afraid, and I went out and I hid your gold in the ground. See, here's what belongs to you. Brought the 1 bag back. His master replied, you wicked, lazy servant. So you knew that I harvest where I have not sown and gather where I have not scattered seed. Well then, you should have put my money on deposit with the bankers so that when I returned, I would have received it back with interest. Take the bag of gold from him, give it to the one who has 10 bags. For those who have will be given more, and they will have an abundance. And as for those who do not have, even what they have will be taken from them. And throw that worthless servant outside into the darkness where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. There is a harshness to me about God. If I'm just perfectly honest, I'm sure there's a couple of other people that are thinking about this. That the idea of investing not equally and expecting a return and then coming back and passing judgment with a real judgment, not judgmentally, but with honestness and fairness, there's something that I bristle against just a little bit in this. Because don't I want God to be loving and gracious? And yes, I do, but he's truthful too. So this idea of expectation can seem awfully ungracious, I realize, or it can to me. 2 thoughts. 1, remember the title of this, for many of us, or even in your Bible, if you have an older copy of the Bible, would be the parable of the talents. And the reason is that a talent was an actual weight of measure. It was roughly 75 pounds. And so in the way that we would interpret, if we just wanted to be very literal in interpreting the Greek, we would say that he gave 5 talents of gold, or 5 times 75 pounds. He gave 2 talents of gold, 150 pounds roughly, or 1 talent of gold, 75 pounds of gold to the third person. Which in modern economy means he basically doled out about $5 million to one, $2 million to another, and a rough, cool $1 million to another. So when I think about the idea of, interesting, God's expectations on investment seem a little bit harsh to me, a listener in this parable at that time would have immediately gone into that thought game that many of us have gone to. Oh, but if I just had X amount of money, I would spend it so much differently than those other people. Oh, if I just had the lottery. We've all got some amount of money in our mind that we would spend really well and do good things with. Well, the first audience that heard this, all 3 of them received something in the category of that amount of money. So this wasn't just, hey, here's a 20, go do something really good with it and come back. That's actually an experiment we do as youth pastors all the time. We're like, hey, I'm going to give 3 kids a 20 and see how they spend it, and it's going to be a great sermon illustration. You get that? You writing that one down? Good. Yes, perfect. Take notes. No, these are extravagant amounts of money, and it's actually okay when we're talking about extravagant sums of money to expect that it's done something with extravagantly, right? That's the first thought. But the other thought on the idea of expectation is this. We have to remember that the concept of God's grace is not opposed to our effort. The concept of God's grace is opposed to our earning. And there's a difference between those two, and you've probably heard this phrase before. Grace is not opposed to our effort. It's opposed to our earning. In fact, effort is expected in this. Investment is expected. Believing that I'm the one who is sovereign at the end of the earnings is a violation of grace. It's just simply not true. But effort is expected. And so as God does invest unequally, he does expect with equity or fairness a return on those investments from all of us. Third idea, and we'll return to this idea of investment in a minute. Third idea on God's investment is actually involves risk, and maybe I want to put this one in quotes. It involves God's risk, his own risk. Think about it this way. If you've ever been in any work environment in which delegation happens, whether you are the delegator or you've been delegated to, what that usually means is somebody is passing off things that they could potentially be doing themselves, but should not be doing themselves because the number of things they have to do on their plate. Or, when we view it better, it's an opportunity to develop other people around us. Or it's necessary for the strategy that 5 people be working on 5 different parts of a larger whole. There's good and bad versions of delegation. But in this passage, God is in essence delegating. And the difference is, God is an all-powerful being that has no needs whatsoever. And so anything that he delegates, he would be so much better at without us. Thank you. And so his motivation in delegation can't simply be any of the motivations that would happen in the business world. Oh yeah, but kingdom can't expand further if I. Nope. Oh, God thinks, yes, but if I just delegate, then I won't have so much to do because I'm a finite and limited being. Okay, so the concept of God's delegation simply has no kingdom efficiency to it. The only agenda in God potentially delegating, in fact, therefore, there's somewhat of a risk. If he just wanted to not involve us, things could get done so much better. Do you have the personality type where you've ever thought that? Internal confession? My external confession? So, that's not a reality for God. He gives and invests inside of people for a motivation not of kingdom efficiency, because he can do it so much more efficiently without us. Thank you. And God does not need us. He wants our co-participation with him and not our performance. He gives in relationship. He gives to be with. He gives so that we would be with him in all that we have, because he simply doesn't need us. In fact, if you're ever to fill in the statement, God needs fill in the blank. If on the back of the program I wrote, God needs fill in the blank, whatever we put in the blank is the beginning of bad theology. An all-powerful being simply has no needs. And so he gives out of freedom and invests within us out of freedom because he wants us with him. He wants our co-participation in the kingdom not our performance in the kingdom. Okay, so God's investment is these three things. It's not equal for all. It is expectant of a return, and it involves his own risk. So what are the implications for us if we are these other characters? And here we begin just to think about applying a little bit the concept of these multiple characters. Well, you can see how this one might be going in a minute. First of all, our investment is also not equal for all. If God gives unequally, and the expectation is to invest well, we will be investing what we have into life and the world unequally. Now, as Carl mentioned, I traffic in faith and work circles. So basically, the Christian educational nonprofit I work for is called Denver Institute. We do faith and work education for Denver's industries and issues, predominantly through running public events or doing spiritual formation and leadership programs. In the faith and work circles, boy, I tell you, Matthew 25 is a favorite passage, and it usually goes like this. Are you a 5-talent person or a 2-talent person? I can't even do it with a straight face. It drives me nuts every time I hear it. Or are you a 1-talent person? Okay, this is really common. You might have even heard that before. That happens in the world where I talk faith and work because we really want to talk about the economic aspects of the kingdom and investing well and stewardship. And so are you a 5, a 2, or a 1-talent person? We got a couple confusions going on. Is anyone in the room the living God who could perfectly judge themselves to know if they're a 5 or a 2 or a 1-talent person? This literally reverses creator and created. If that question is posed to you rhetorically today, you're like, yeah, I really am a 5-talent person. This is a mess. The other thing that's a mess is it assumes something about the world which is simply not true. It assumes that place in which we invest is a level playing field. And it's not. So even if God did give equally, and all of us got 2 talents or 2 bags of gold, I enter into the playing field of life with the 3 bonuses in the game. I am a male, I'm white, and I'm middle class. And the playing field is predisposed in my favor because of years of benefit. I have education for generations in my family. A graduate degree is simply an expectation of how the world works. I've never missed a meal. I've never wondered where my next meal was coming from, unless I was backpacking or doing something dumb on an adventure camp. The point of this is, I can go out into the world, and for somebody as equally as talented as me, who is a woman, I might be paid more. The playing field is simply not level. And so if we look at this from a standpoint of we all are responsible to take what we have and invest it equally, it assumes that there's a fairness, and it assumes that the world is unbroken. And it assumes that there are systems in place that don't create barriers to equity. And that's just not true of the world. And so instead of thinking about our idea of our investment not being equal, we have to be careful of this. Are you a 5 or a 2 or a 1? There's a few different problems with it. And maybe the third one is that it creates tons of comparison for us. And I probably don't need to go too far poking around in any of our worlds to find our tendency towards comparison. I live in Centennial, Colorado. Can I tell you the 3 idols of Centennial, Colorado? Consumerism, personal comfort, and comparison. In my town, are we in Centennial still? Yeah, no. So here where I live, real close in the south suburbs, consumerism and personal comfort and comparison are idols to us. And so keeping up with the Joneses, or at least looking right now, if you were to look at my lawn and compare it to the lawn Jedis that live on both sides of me, that have putting greens in the driest July we've had in forever, this shouldn't bother me as much as it does. And so the problem with thinking of, if we're not comfortable with the idea, that our investment is unequal, it can lead us towards a comparison, and comparison is simply the enemy of spiritual formation, and it's an enemy of whole life stewardship. Because I stopped thinking about, what are the hand of cards that I have? I was like, your kids don't throw a fit in the Pete's coffee like my kids throw a fit in the Pete's coffee. How easy must your life be? oh yeah, but both of you don't have to work full time to pull this off. Or, oh yeah, isn't that nice that you get this? Comparison is the enemy of stewardship. It's the enemy of whole life stewardship, and it's the enemy of our own spiritual formation. And I would suggest that when we play that no-win game, we're actually guilty of the same thing that the servant that didn't invest only one talent was, which is took the concept of investment and started primarily with focus upon self, instead of focus eternally and externally. And so, sisters and brothers, I would just say guard your hearts against the concept of comparison as you think about the way that you spend and shape and invest your life. Reminder that we invest our lives unequally because God has given to us unequally. He does not expect the person who was given 2 talents to make 5. He just doesn't. That's bad math. He expects investment. He expects faithfulness. He wants co-participation with us. He wants us to invest this one precious life. Second thought is that our investment is actually hopeful of a return. I meant to put hopeful on my slides. So God is expectant of a return, but we're hopeful of a return. And the reason is this. Remember that difference between effort and earning. Our investment, it means that we bring effort and we take our life and we try to be really thoughtful and reflective and intentional about it. We remember that what God gives us is not ours. Stewardship simply means I've been giving something. It's not mine. I do something with it according to the hopes and wills and wishes and standards of the giver. And that also means, though, that we're not actually in charge of our own lives. There's a limit to our own sovereignty. There are things outside of us. I can invest really, really well, and I can hope for a return. But ultimately, this is co-participation with God, in whom we live and move and have our being. And so that makes our investment of our lives slightly different than the way God invests. He can expect a return, and we can be hopeful of that with him. And the final thought on our investment is it actually involves risk. It involves risk of our own. If we're going to take our lives and think very seriously about investing the whole of who we are as stewardship, that's going to risk our time, potentially, and that's going to risk our preferences. And that might risk our ability to be involved in some other things that we'd like to be involved in. That might risk a couple programs at Centennial Covenant Church if they're keeping you too busy doing certain things to be involving and investing your life in other places. It's another classic that we do as pastors. Hope I'm not poking around here too much, Carl. I'll say sorry later. But friends, we can keep y'all too busy so that you're involved in the walls and you're not involved in the world, stewarding the whole of your life. So we might be putting some of the things that we really love doing that are really fun and that we've been doing forever at risk. We might be risking our reputation. I remember this guy, his name was Jesus, and they accused him of being a glutton and a drunkard because he hung out with sinners and tax collectors. So the point of this is that when we invest the whole of our lives, we can be hopeful for a return, and we can also recognize that all investment has risk to it of some type. Okay, let's pull this together. Here are 2 key questions I want to leave you with to think about and reflect as we think about this idea of the parable of the talents. And I want to suggest that these are actually, these 3 questions take 3 important things in the life of the believer in the church, and they hold them together in tension. And those are our worship of God, our formation in Christ, and our mission in the world. Our worship of God, our formation in Christ, and our mission in the world. If you want to shorten it, we could talk about a relationship up, our relationship in, and our relationship out. These ideas take these 3 and hold them together in tension. They don't let one be more important than the other, be more important than the other. And so the first key question for our stewardship is, what has God entrusted to me? I just want to suggest, Carl was flirting with the idea of calling earlier. He talked about it a few different times. I want to say that if you follow Jesus and you are able to breathe oxygen, you are called. So the question is not, are you called to ministry? And by that we have a preset definition that it's pastoral ministry, or that it's young life, or that it's some other thing that has a particular endpoint on the W-2 in a Christian organization. So that's not the question. So if you're a follower of Jesus and you can breathe oxygen, you are called. The question is, what are you called to? This is a whole life stewardship question. What is it? If you were to take the whole of your hands and you would think of what is it that I have here that God has entrusted to me? Well, I've got 2 little girls. This is me. I've got a couple little girls at home. So part of my stewardship is I'm a father. Well, and I'm a husband. And I'm a neighbor. I'm not a neighbor in Thornton. I'm a neighbor in Centennial to particular people. And so these are part of the people the neighbors and the relationships that God has entrusted to me. I work. I coach a 2nd and 3rd grade girls volleyball team, which proves the Catholics are right about purgatory. That's okay. I've already earned off 3 seasons, if you will. Okay. The point of this is, all of us can go through this inventory, and we should. That the bag of gold, if you will, is not just about fiscal investment. It's about the whole of everything that we have. What is everything that we have? What is everything God has entrusted to? The life of our mind, educational level, our relationships, the fact that we are retired and we have an incredible amount of time now that we didn't have in the same way when we were working. What is everything? Get really, really reflective on all the things that God has entrusted to you. That's a spiritual formation question. I could have just asked this at the beginning, said, let's leave church, and it probably would have been a lot better than what I just did. And then the second question is, how should I use it to love God and love others? I never answered really along the way of what's the concept of investment? And I think the concept of investment is simply what we pray every time we pray the Lord's Prayer. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And if Jesus, in essence, when he was asked to sum up, what does it look like to bring thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven? Teacher, what's the greatest command? Is the actual question that was posed to him. He answered as any good Jew would have. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Love your neighbor as yourself. But then he says, on these things, they sum up all of the law and the prophets. If I want to be really overly reductionistic and say, what does investment of my life look like? I'm going to go with Jesus and say that all of my life ought to be pointed at 2 motivations to love God and love others. Coaching a 2nd and 3rd grade volleyball team, all joking aside, that's ministry. For me, that's mission. That's stewarding the coaching that I was given for 15 years, and it's turning it over into an environment of little girls that don't want anything to do with my wonderful coaching. But the point is, this is an attempt to worship God. You made me in a certain way. You gave me a coach's disposition. And it's an attempt to love these girls and to love their family, because I'm convinced, and most of them don't know I'm a Christian, but I'm convinced they'll have a different experience if I take this motivation of whole life stewardship seriously. Those girls will have a different experience. They'll have different body image issues. They'll have different confidence on the court. They'll understand that a woman is powerful. I can create an experience for them in 2nd and 3rd grade coaching that's an aspect of my worship of God and my mission to the world. And I haven't even started sharing the gospel yet. Or have I? Friends, here's my closing thought. I was at a funeral recently, somebody who had passed in hospice, and it got me thinking about what the end of one's life looks like. I did a wedding yesterday for a dear friend, and I painted the picture I hoped with this couple for what their 50th wedding anniversary would look like. When we take these types of long trajectories, this parable is simply asking us to be leading the type of life that when we find those last moments and people are gathered at their funeral, they would say, that was such a well-invested life. Those are the funerals where there are tears of happiness and sadness. Or when this young couple sits at their 50th wedding anniversary with their kids feel so proud, they feel so honored, they feel well-developed. They can just laud and tell stories about their children or about their parents at that 50th anniversary. They can say our parents have invested our life well. This is what the parable is talking about. It's just the long, slow obedience in the same direction of taking everything that we have and putting it into 2 motivations. What can I do to love God with it, and what can I do to love others with it? I think God's looking for stewards who would invest in this way every day and into every place that they find themselves. So let's pray together. Father, we pause to say that we are thankful that you've invested into us. In you we live and we move and we have our being, and you've given to us well. For each one of us, I pray that just by your Spirit you would be leading us towards knowing and discerning who you've made us to be, that we would love you and that we would love others well. And we ask this because you are a Father and you want us to be with you. Amen.